Hello, can I come in?
Sure, come on in.
Hello, Professor K. How are you?
Fine, very good.
Richard Branson went into space, and Jeff Bezos is going to space in just a few days. What are the effects of billionaires going to space? And why do billionaires want to go to space?
Well, the media has focused on the battle of the billionaires and the egos of these very powerful and rich people. But I think there's a bigger story. We have to look at the history behind transportation and the steps that are now taking place. If you take a look at the history of the railroad and the history of the airplane, you realize that transportation moved in three basic stages. In stage one, you had the railroads and you had the airplanes being used for transporting of freight, transporting of goods. And who did it? Governments and the military. So they were the prime users of this kind of technology. Eventually, the technology became more widespread and safe, but expensive, and so rich people began to use this for transportation purposes for their own use. This was not for the average person. It was for people rich enough who could afford to get a ticket. That's phase two. Phase three is, well, today, mom and dad, everybody can get on a train, everybody can get on an airplane and go pretty much where they want. Prices have dropped considerably, and there's lots of airplanes, lots of trains now. In the same way, the history of space tourism will probably follow suit. Stage one was the 1960s when we went to the moon, but prices were enormous. Only the military, only governments in the United States and Russia could afford to put things into outer space. For example, the Apollo space program absorbed 5% of the US federal budget. 5% of every dollar people paid in income tax went to the moon program. That's unsustainable. And so lunar transport, space transport pretty much fell flat on its face. That's phase one. Now we're entering phase two. Phase two is when prices are dropping to the point where wealthy individuals can now go into outer space. If you have $250,000, you too can get on Virgin Galactic and go into outer space. If you have $28 million, you can win an auction and go into outer space with Jeff Bezos and the Blue Origin rocket. If you have $55 million, you can go into outer space with SpaceX. And there's a Japanese billionaire who has bought out seats in one of SpaceX's expeditions to the moon. So believe it or not, a private citizen, can actually buy tickets to go to the moon with his pals. So we're entering a new era. Eventually, decades into the future, we'll enter stage three, where even mom and dad will be able to go into outer space. So what's behind this transition? Several factors. First of all, rockets are now reusable. Long time ago, every time you used a rocket, you would throw it away. Now think of throwing away your car after using it once. If you threw away your car after using it once, transportation by cars would be extremely expensive. Only governments would be able to get inside a car. Well, that's what we do with rockets. Every time we use a rocket, we throw it away. Okay, that's why rocketry is so expensive. But now, because of Elon Musk and SpaceX and Jeff Bezos, rockets are reusable. So the booster rocket can be reused several times, thereby dropping the cost. So what does it cost to put you in outer space? It costs $10,000 to put a pound of anything into near-Earth orbit, just to orbit around the Earth. $10,000 per pound. That's your weight in gold. Think of your body made out of solid gold. That's what it costs to put you into orbit around the Earth. To put you on the moon would cost about $100,000 a pound. To put you on Mars would cost about $1 million a pound. So the cost has to go down. costs are going down for several reasons. First, rockets are now reusable. Second, billionaires are opening up their checkbooks and helping to fund these missions with private money. That didn't happen before. Before it was just nations that put up the money, but now these billionaires have enough money to sponsor their own rocket program. And of course, technology, miniaturization, so on and so forth, has also dropped down the cost. So space travel is roughly, let's say, twice to 3-4 times cheaper than it used to be. So now even small nations can launch probes into outer space. The United Arab Emirates, a tiny little Arab nation, sent a probe to Mars several months ago. That would be unheard of. And yet here was a small nation in the Middle East contracting with a Japanese rocket company to put their probe orbiting, around the planet Mars. So the club has expanded enormously. The Chinese are regularly sending astronauts into outer space. Not just the Chinese, but the Indians have targeted the moon, not to mention, of course, Russia or the European Union. Prices have dropped to the point where even private individuals, tourists, can now go into outer space if you have enough money.
So first we went to the moon and then to Mars. What's next?
Well, first it's going to be done in steps. First, we're going to put an orbiter around the moon. In other words, we're not going to go to the moon and then abandon it. We want to have a permanent presence on the moon, which means an international space station of some sort around the moon instead of around the Earth. Then from that, we're going to launch a probe to Mars. And of course, the colonization of Mars could take decades to centuries because Mars is a 2-year trip. It's a 2-year trip to Mars. To go to Mars takes about 9 months. Once you're on Mars, you have to wait for the planets to align correctly. Then several months later, you fire back, another 9 months in deep space. So the round trip is 2 years. Now to go to the moon, it takes 3 days. Hop, skip, and a jump to go to the moon. 3 days, you're on the moon. But to go to Mars takes 9 months and 2 years for a round trip ticket to Mars. Now, beyond Mars, we're thinking about the asteroid belt. The asteroid belt could be like what is called the Louisiana Purchase. Now, let me explain. When George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and those guys created the United States of America in 1776, they realized that most of the North American continent was uncharted. They colonized the United States perhaps up to the beginning of the Midwest. But everything beyond the Midwest was total mystery. Now, the French controlled that area. Napoleon was fighting a war. Napoleon needed cash. So he made a bargain with Thomas Jefferson. Napoleon said, I'll pretty much give you the rest of the rest of America at a bargain basement rate, but you got to give me cash. So a deal was struck, and all of a sudden, the size of the United States doubled. Doubled. That was the Louisiana Purchase. So pretty much the entire Midwest of America was bought by a contract with Napoleon. But Thomas Jefferson said, looking at a map of North America, it may take 1,000 years, he said, 1,000 years to colonize to the West Coast. What happened? What happened was gold was discovered in 1848 or so. The gold rush took place. All of a sudden, thousands of people were converging on San Francisco, and all of a sudden, California was being not industrialized, but being populated. And as a consequence, the United States all of a sudden was becoming a nation. So what was wrong with Thomas Jefferson's prediction? Thomas Jefferson never predicted that private enterprise, that is, people wanting to find gold, would accelerate the expansion of the United States. Some people think the next gold rush is the asteroid belt. The asteroids have many precious minerals that are very rare on the planet Earth, like platinum, for example. Platinum-based metals are extremely valuable, and we use some of these rare earths in Silicon Valley. Very precious, very rare, but they're found in asteroids. And so we think that by mining the asteroids, we could create another gold rush, to then begin the process of colonizing the asteroid belt. So that's another possibility. But beyond the asteroid belt, there's the moons of Jupiter. The most interesting is Europa. Europa has a liquid water ocean underneath the ice. Now, why is that important? Because where you find water, you will probably also find life. And why is that? Because life depends on water-soluble chemicals, chemicals that dissolve in water that are carbon-based, like proteins, for example, and DNA. So, if you have water in liquid form on a moon of Jupiter called Europa, then perhaps there could be life forms swimming in the ocean. The oceans are, roughly speaking, around room temperature. It's not ice. It's cold, but it's not ice, meaning that Europa could actually have life on it, while Mars, we think, is a frozen desert. Mars has some liquid water lakes, but they're under the ice caps, while under the ice cover of Europa, there's an ocean whose volume is bigger than the oceans of the planet Earth. There's more liquid water in the oceans of this small moon of Jupiter than there is water in our oceans. So that could be the next step beyond the asteroid belt.
The spacecraft of the Virgin Galactic looks different from other spacecraft. Why is that?
Well, different billionaires have different designs for their spaceship. If you take a look at the Virgin Galactic spaceship, it's actually a rocket piggybacking on an airplane. So the airplane takes the rocket up to about 10 miles above the surface of the Earth, and then the rocket turns on its engines, and it looks sort of like an airplane itself, and it then goes to 55 miles above the surface of the Earth. That's why Virgin Galactic's rocket looks more like an airplane. While Jeff Bezos of the Amazon fortune, founder of Blue Origins and the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos is going the more traditional route of a single rocket with 2 stages blasting off to the edge of space. And his rocket goes a little bit farther. It goes about 60 miles to the very edge of the atmosphere, and it looks like a rocket. It attains weightlessness just like the previous rocket by Richard Branson for just a few minutes. But it is a ride that very few people have ever experienced. It's a ride to the edge of space. Now, on the other hand, SpaceX is also in the market for space tourism. His rockets go completely around the planet Earth, and therefore the cost is more expensive. So his tickets will be in the tens of millions rather than the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Around when do you think ordinary people can go to space?
Well, ordinary people can go into space now, but you have to pay for it. So it's not for the faint-hearted. You have to have at least $250,000 lying around someplace to do it. For example, the Russians have been doing it. Even before the recent expeditions into outer space by these billionaires, the Russians allowed a Microsoft multimillionaire to go into outer space on the Vostok, the Soyuz space capsule. In fact, I actually interviewed him on my radio show, and I asked him, how much did it cost for you as a Microsoft a billionaire to ride on a Russian rocket? He said that, well, he's not allowed to say so because he signed the confidentiality agreement. But I said, well, is it in the neighborhood of 20 million? And he said, well, yeah, it's in that neighborhood. So you can ride on a Russian rocket if you have, let's say, $20 million lying around someplace.
Wow.
Thank you very much, Professor K.
Well, it's been my pleasure.
Thank you.